handle that stress. Some people do great, some people don't. It just depends on the individual. So we keep an eye on that officer to make sure they're okay. Like I said before, to alert their family so that the families or friends or loved ones don't find out on the news, so they can touch base with the ones that they care about. And we give them a basic knowledge of the investigative process, like what we're going to do further in the evening once we arrive to PIU.
And as a peer support officer, what is the role when you're actually interacting or accounting for an officer who has actually been a shooter in the case?
Normally we separate the involved officers. So if you have an involved officer, they'll have an escort. If you have a second involved officer, there'll be a second escort. And so they will be separated. We try to kind of distance them from the scene, to shield them from any news media, to kind of have a private setting so that they can kind of process the event, talk to their loved ones, and not have to deal with the media right away.
Are they allowed to drive anywhere, or do they have to go straight to PIU?
So if you're a shooter at a critical incident, then you are to have an escort transport you. There have been some instances where the officer would drive themselves, and then that escort would follow them. But the connection between the officer and the escort should be kind of hand in hand through this event.
Okay. And is that policy any different if you are a canine handler with an active dog in the vehicle?
Not to my knowledge. However, there are some things to consider with canines. If an officer has a canine, I would want to, one, check on the officer and know their mental state to see if they were okay to operate their vehicle. If I myself were to get into a canine vehicle with a canine dog, even though I'm a sworn police officer, that may not be a good situation because that dog may not know me, may see me as a threat. So if dealing with a canine officer, I would either check on his or her status to make sure they're okay so that I could follow them in my car en route to PIU, or I would contact the lieutenant of the canine unit to have them set up another handler to come get that truck and that dog so that we could keep all the officers on scene safe so that dog didn't consider anyone they're not familiar with a threat.
So an escort still remains even if it's a canine?
Yes.
Okay. So on this night, you said you went to U of L for the emergency room?
I did.
Okay. When you arrived, who was there?
When I got there, I touched base with Sergeant Mattingly. His wife later showed up, followed by some of the colonels and Chief Conrad. Doc Freville met me there. He's our police counselor that works hand in hand with peer support.
Okay. And did you see anyone else there that evening?
There were some officers from other units, but no one from the group that was at the incident address.
Okay. At some point, do you see Detective Brent Hankinson arrive at the U of L hospital?
I did.
Did that stand out to you?
Yes.
Why?
I was actually on my way from leaving the hospital. I touched base with Sergeant Mattingly and his wife and made sure that they had what they needed. And as I was exiting the main ER doors to go into like the lobby of the ER, Detective Hankinson came through. We had a brief conversation as we passed.
Okay. At that point, did you know that he had been involved in the case?
Yes.
At that point, did you know that he was a officer who had discharged their firearm in the case?
No.
Okay. Following up after that with the families, what did you do next?
After I spoke to Detective Hankinson, I left U of L and went to our public integrity unit and touched base with my team and the officers that were there.
Okay. Was Detective Hankinson there by that time?
No.
Do you know approximately how much later it was that he arrived?
It was after me. I'm not sure the time frame, but I do know it wasn't the time it would take you to get from U of L. There was a delay,
Okay.
but I cannot remember the specific increments of it.
When you were at U of L, you said that you briefly spoke to him.
I did.
What did you say?
I talked to him and I told him that, or I asked him, I said, where are you going? And he said, I'm going to see John, Sergeant Mattingly. And I said, okay, you need to get to PIU. And he said, I've already talked to Kim. And I said, okay, and we went our different directions.
Okay. But in your mind, he needed to report?
Yes. when you're involved in a critical incident from the scene, your next stop from the scene should be PIU.
Did he appear to have any type of escort at that time?
No.
I think that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you very much, Sergeant Stillwell.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Sergeant, just so I understand your testimony correctly, you responded when you learned of this incident to U of L Hospital, correct?
Correct.
Did you ever go up to 3003 Springfield?
No, sir. I was never there.
Did some of your, are you in charge of the peer support?
My
unit?
role during that time was the assistant team commander, and the team commander was out of town on vacation, so I was acting commander of the team at that time.
And did you call other team members and direct them to go to Springfield?
I did.
But you never went to Springfield yourself, correct?
That's correct.
Do you know whether Brett Hankison was ever assigned a peer support officer while he was on the scene at Springfield?
That I don't.
So the first time you saw him was when he showed up at U of L Hospital,
Yes.
correct? And he did not have a peer support officer with him at that time?
No.
Did you assign one to him then?
I did not. I wasn't aware of whether he had a peer support escort at that time or not. It wasn't until I later got to PIU that I was made aware that he did not have an escort.
Did you find it unusual that he came to U of L to check on his friend and partner, John Mattingly?
As unusual through the policy, yes.
But again, the policy is that somebody is supposed to assign a peer support officer right there on the scene. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And to your knowledge, that wasn't done?
Correct.
Was it done for anybody that was there involved?
Yes.
Who?
The other two officers, Officer Franklin and Officer Connor, were both escorts for officers on the scene.
And were there more than those two peer support officers there?
Yes, Sergeant Nagel, who's a squad leader, was there as well.
Okay. But to your knowledge, nobody was assigned to Brett Hankison, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Sergeant Stillwell, are officers aware of the policies when it comes to being involved in a critical incident and what they're to do with peer support?
Yes.
And did Miles Cosgrove, Detective Miles Cosgrove on that evening, another involved officer, did he have peer support?
Yes.
No further questions.
May I, Your Honor?
Sure.
Sergeant, do you know whether Brett Hankison was aware of that specific policy?
I haven't spoke to him directly about that. However, our policies are disseminated through our email, and you have to check off on them within 10 days every time that they're submitted. So he's required to submit and view the policy once it comes out, and that has been a standing policy for a good while.
Did you direct him when you saw him at U of L Hospital to go to PIU?
No. I spoke to him and I said, you need to go to PIU, and he said to me that he'd already talked to Kim, who was his major in his unit.
And he did respond to PIU, is that correct?
He did.
Thank you. Nothing further.
After you left U of L, you get to PIU. Is Detective Hankinson there at that time?
He's not.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Matthews?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you can step down. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, the Commonwealth's next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. It's going to be former Chief Steve Conrad.
you go ahead and take a seat. And if you'll raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You can take your mask off while you're testifying if you wish, but you're not required to.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Steve Conrad.
And where do you work currently?
I am retired now, so I don't work.
Okay. And where did you used to work?
I was, up until June 1st of 2020, the Louisville Metro Police Chief.
And how long were you with the Louisville Metro Police Department in your career?
I started in 1980 and retired from the department in 2012. And I left and went to, in 2025, or 2005, and went to the city of Glendale, Arizona, to take the job there as the police chief. I worked there as a police chief for 6 years and then had an opportunity to come back to be the police chief here in Louisville in 2012. I was in that position from 2012 to June of 2020. So all total, that would have been 34 years as a police officer from the rank of a police recruit up to a police chief.
And back in March of 2020, March 12th into the early morning hours, March 13th, were you serving as the chief of LMPD at that time?
Yes, sir, I was.
Okay. And on that day, were you notified that there had been a critical incident somewhere in the city?
Actually, I was notified about 1 in the morning on March 13th.
Okay. Can you just go through the notification process of how you became aware of what occurred on March 13th of 2020?
Yes. Again, at about 1 in the morning, I started receiving phone calls and text messages from a number of different members of the department, making me aware of an officer-involved shooting.
And when you were notified, what do you do when that happens?
Typically, it depends on the situation. In this situation, an officer had been shot. That prompted me to respond to the hospital once I'd gathered the initial information from the people who were calling and texting me. In situations where an officer has not been shot, in those situations I will typically respond to the scene of the shooting, get a sense of what's occurred, and give preliminary statements to the media. I didn't do that in this situation.
Okay. In this case, then, did you go straight to the U of L hospital versus the scene?
Yes, that is correct.
Who was there when you arrived?
There were many people in the emergency room when I arrived. There were, I would guess, maybe 10 or 15 police employees. There were, Sergeant John Mattingly had been shot. His parents were there. His wife was there. There may have been another family member. I believe it was his sister who was there. And then beyond that, obviously, the hospital staff.
Okay. In the information that you received, did you know how many officers had been involved?
I received different information over the course of that early morning. Initially, the information that I was given was that there were 2 officers involved in the shooting. Later, I learned that there was a 3rd officer that was involved in that shooting as well.
When you were at U of L, did you see any of those involved officers at any time?
The only officer involved in the shootings that I saw at the hospital was Detective Brent Hankinson.
And why did that stand out to you, if it did at all?
It did. In my experience during my time as the chief at the department, when we've had officer-involved shootings and where an officer is injured, it is not unusual for friends and colleagues of that injured officer to come to the hospital to see what is happening and see what the condition of the officer is. But in an officer-involved shooting, typically those officers are assigned someone from peer support which is a volunteer team of officers that we have that have training and counseling. They're led by a doctor who also has a degree in psychology. And the peer support officers will essentially, there'll be one assigned to each officer involved. And their job is essentially to get them the support that they're needing, making sure they're getting something to eat, making sure they have something to drink, making sure they're making contact with their families, and doing that sort of thing. They also accompany them to the Public Integrity Office, where the Public Integrity Office collects evidence from the shooting. That might be evidence such as fingerprint swabs, or counting the number of rounds in their weapons, depending on which weapons they had fired. And so, to your point, sir, it was unusual when I saw Detective Hankinson. He came into the emergency room. He was not being escorted by a member of the peer support team, which I thought was unusual.
Did you see any other officers that had been involved in this in that capacity at the hospital?
I did not.
What was the demeanor of Detective Hankison when you saw him at the hospital?
When I saw him at the hospital, he walked in and he went into the room where Sergeant Mattingly and his wife were at, I assume to check on him. At that point, there was really no ability for me to assess his demeanor. After he came out of that room, he was standing out in the emergency room, but out of the actual physical room where Sergeant Mattingly was. I saw him standing there. I approached him at that point and had a brief conversation with him. During that conversation, I noticed that Detective Hankinson was physically shaking, as if he was upset or very, very nervous.
Okay. Now, you said that the policy was that he should have reported to PIU. Is that correct?
The process, as opposed to a policy, would have been that he would have been assigned someone by peer support, and peer support would have essentially shepherded him to public integrity, so that evidence could be collected, and then again make sure that he got home safely.
In your experience with LMPD, especially as the chief over those years that you were there in leadership roles, how many officer-involved shootings do you think you responded to at U of L?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
There were, I would guess, during my time as chief, there were likely 50 officer-involved shootings. The number of times that officers were injured were significantly fewer than suspects that officers ended up having to shoot. 3 or 4 times, and that's just a guess. I honestly don't know.
In any other occasion when you've responded to U of L and where an officer has been shot in the line of duty and there's been other officers discharged of firearms, have you ever seen another officer who has discharged, not injured, ever report to U of L ER before going to PIU?
Not that I'm aware of. It could have occurred, but not that I'm aware of.
Thank you very much, Chief Conrad. I think that's all the questions I have.
Yes, sir.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Chief.
Good afternoon, sir.
With reference to what you just testified to, that the policy is to go to PIU from the scene of an officer-involved shooting for an officer that's involved in that shooting, correct?
And again, I believe it's a practice as opposed to a policy, but yes, sir.
A policy is a rule that you're ordered to follow, correct?
It is a policy or a procedure that directs your actions during some sort of activity, and if you deviate from that policy or practice and are questioned about it, you have to be in a position to explain why you may have deviated.
So that reporting to PIU for an officer who's involved in discharging his weapon in an officer-involved shooting is a practice rather than a policy, correct?
Again, I would refer to it as one of the procedures that would have been followed by our public integrity unit, and they have the responsibility for interviewing witnesses, collecting evidence, and making sure that they are able to fully investigate an officer-involved shooting. And that would involve collecting evidence from the officers that were involved in the shooting.
And who assigns a peer support officer to an officer who's involved in a shooting?
That is typically done by the supervisor of the peer support team. That could be a lieutenant who actually leads the team, or it could be one of the sergeants who acts as a assistant supervisor in that. And to answer your question, I don't know.
But it's not up to the officer who's involved in the shooting to go out and grab somebody and ask them to be his peer support officer, correct?
That is correct, sir.
Are you aware of the relationship between Brett Hankison and John Mattingly?
I am not, sir. I know that they've worked together for many years. I assume they're friends. Beyond that, I don't know.
Okay, and you testified that it's not unusual for friends and relatives to show up at the emergency room when an officer is injured in the line of duty, correct?
That is correct.
Did you find it unusual that Brett Hankison would show up at U of L emergency room to check on his friend John Mattingly that early that morning?
The only thing that I found unusual about it was he was not escorted by someone from the peer support team.
And you don't know whether he'd been assigned peer support officer or not at that point, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And did you later learn that he did go to PIU?
I know that he went to PIU. I don't know at what point. I don't remember at what point I learned that.
Do you know whether it made any difference in the investigation that occurred?
I do not, sir.
And I think you testified that when you observed him after he came out of Sergeant Mattingly's room in the emergency department, that Brett was visibly shaking?
Yes, that is correct.
He's upset by the situation, correct?
I assume so, sir. I don't know.
For some reason, he was visibly shaking, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else of this witness?
In describing his demeanor a minute ago, you described it as upset, nervous, or upset or nervous. Is there a difference in your mind between what upset means or nervous means?
I don't know that there is. Again, I saw him visibly shaking. Beyond that, I'm not sure what would have caused that other than being upset or being nervous. And I don't know that I could tell you which caused him to be shaking.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Nothing further.
You can step down. Thank you.
Thank you.
And your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor, it's going to be Officer Chris Kitchen.
If you'll take a seat, please. All right, if you'll raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Please state your name for the record.
Officer Christopher Kitchen,
And where do you work?
Louisville Metro SWAT Team.
And how long have you been with Louisville Metro?
17 years,
Okay. And how long have you been with the SWAT team?
15.
Okay. And did you receive special training to become a member of SWAT?
Yes, sir.
What type of training did you receive?
I've gone through, well, initially SWAT school. I've also been through sniper schools and continuous training.
Specialized training beyond a patrol officer?
Yes.
Okay. And back in March, particularly March 12th into March 13th of 2020, were you working with SWAT at LMPD?
Yes, I was.
Okay. On that evening, what was your assignment?
I was assigned to the warrants that were being served on Elliott Street.
Okay. And did you ever go to Elliott Street?
Yes.
Okay. Can you just describe that for us briefly?
So my role that night on Elliott Street was we had 3 different locations that we were hitting, and we were going to do them one at a time. So my initial role was to hold cover on 2 of the locations while an entry team on one location cleared that location, and then we'd move to the next one. And then I would lead the team clearing the 3rd location to the final house that we were going to clear.
And what does cover mean?
I'm holding down with my rifle, making sure that no one comes out of the house that's going to do us harm or my team harm.
Are you able to finish that mission, or does something happen?
We were actually in the process of taking someone into custody that had come out of the 2nd location while the team was clearing the 1st location, when across our headsets, which is connected to our radios, we get the call, shots fired, officer down,
Okay.
which turned everything into chaos and confusion
Okay. At that scene?
at that scene.
Okay. What do you all do?
At the time, we were trying to figure out, like, was this bleed over from another channel or what? And then Sergeant Fawn, who was also in CID and in SWAT, was able to confirm that at another location that CID was doing a warrant that there was an officer shot. Myself and other officers loaded into our armored Bearcat and proceeded across town to that location.
Is a Bearcat basically a armored vehicle?
It's a very large armored vehicle,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So you switch locations. How long does it take to switch locations?
It was a good, because where we were coming from downtown to there was a good 15-minute drive at least.
Okay. So 15 minutes. Where do you arrive when you all get there?
When we get there, we pull up into the parking lot and are getting cars to move so that we can pull directly in front of the apartment.
Do you remember what the address of that apartment was?
I do not.
Okay. If I said 3003 Springfield, would that be consistent?
It sounds familiar. At the time, we were just being told that it's, initially on scene, we were told it was an upstairs apartment, and then as we pulled closer, we were redirected that it was a downstairs apartment on the right that was already lit up by lights.
What was your viewpoint at this point when you arrive?
I took a position in what's called the turret of the Bearcat. It's an upward open hatch that's armor plated also. I took the position as cover from up there. So as the rest of my team would make the approach to initially throw in what's a throwbot. We have a small robot that we can throw in and drive around to initially clear the location. We were still working under the impression that there was a shooter inside. So I was covering their approach, basically taking patrol and everyone out of it, having them take their guns and put them away, or what we call check up, and I would have primary shot if something did happen to cover my team.
So that night you never go into the apartment.
I made it to just inside the front door. Once the team cleared initially with the robot, we go in to do a methodical clear, just looking for people. And as they pushed into the apartment, I no longer could cover them because they're inside. I'd just be pointing my gun at them, which is no. So I checked up, climbed out of the turret, told my lieutenant I'm pushing up to assist, and I pushed up to the back of what we call a stick, the line of officers, and got there. And as they continued working deep into the apartment, I would move in. It's kind of bounding in, and I made it if you go into the left, kind of goes into like a kitchenette area. I made it just into there where I could see down the hallway.
Okay. Where do you go next after that?
I exit there and I go back to the Bearcat, and where I turned my video off because at the time that we were done, I turned it off, and then I reconvened at the sidewalk with the rest of the SWAT officers.
At that sidewalk, did you notice anything about the scene?
We just had a conversation about like the neighbors and where the bullets inside had possibly gone, and no one knew if there had been a welfare check done at a neighboring apartment. And so I volunteered, and then Sergeant Burns volunteered to go with me to walk to the other apartment just to make sure everyone in that apartment was not bleeding. Everybody was good. Nobody had been hit by anything, and that's when we journeyed down the sidewalk.
When you walk on the sidewalk, do you notice anything?
As we walked down the sidewalk, we had previously noticed the shattered sliding glass doors. I noticed that from the turret. But as we walked down the sidewalk, that's when Sergeant Burns and I observed the bedroom window that had been shot out. I actually looked at Sergeant Burns at night and said, "Hey, do you think this was from tonight, or do you think this is old?"
Okay. I'm going to show you what has already been admitted as Commonwealth's Exhibit 31. Have you take a look at that. Is that a fair and accurate depiction of what you just described as sliding glass doors and a bedroom window?
Yes.
And that evening, where are you in proximity to this picture?
So in proximity to this picture, where the steps are, that leads back into the breezeway or common area, we had gathered right there after we'd cleared.
There's a laser pointer up there if you need it.
We gathered right in this area, and then Sergeant Burns and I walked this area when we observed the windows of the bedroom that had been shot out.
Did you
or shot
have
through.
any thoughts or anything related to those?
Other than the blinds were closed, and asking Sergeant Burns, "Do you think this was from tonight, or do you think this is old?"
Okay. Could you see in either of the windows or the sliding glass doors?
No.
Okay. When you were walking, did you see anyone else at all interact with you on that sidewalk?
As we turned from the window and continued to the neighbor's apartment off into the parking lot, I observed Detective Hankison alone, and he was pointing at himself, and he pointed at the windows. In my opinion, he was taking credit and ownership of that.
What was his demeanor?
He was kind of bouncing as he did it. Again, at the time, I took it as ownership, and hey, that's what I did right there. And then Barnes and I then turned and knocked on the door and did our welfare check.
Okay. Did you see him at all any other times that
No.
evening?
I saw him out of the corner of my eye when I exited the apartment initially on the initial clear as I was making my way to the Bearcat. He was in the parking lot making his way towards the front of the building. Where he went after that, I had no clue. I wasn't looking for him. I wasn't paying attention for him.
Okay.
At the time, I didn't even know that he had been involved in the shooting.
Okay. And after all this, at some point, you returned to the SWAT vehicle?
Yes.
And did you have any further involvement after that?
No. Once we were done, it was turned over to detectives. We left and went back to SWAT headquarters.
Okay. I think those are all the questions I have for you, Officer Kitchen. Thank you very much.
No problem, sir.
Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Officer Kitchen, do you know who put out the radio broadcast about an officer being shot on Springfield while you were on Elliott?
At the time, no. Now, yes.
Who put that out?
Detective Hankinson.
And you just indicated where you were walking when you saw Detective Hankison on the sidewalk. What apartment were you checking on? Do you know?
So I do not know the apartment number, but it was, if the picture's not there, if you're looking at that picture, you're facing the building.
There, it's back up
Okay,
there now.
So this would have been her apartment.
Yes.
There's an apartment that literally, if you walk straight down the sidewalk, that mirrors it. They share a common wall. And we were going there once again, make sure people were okay.
Okay, it
It
would
was a
not have
welfare
been,
check.
I'm sorry, it would not have been an apartment.
Not related to where the rounds from that window and the side glass door went, no. But there was lots of shell casings at the front door. We know rounds went that way. And that was our conversation of, has anyone checked on this apartment? Because that was our first obvious sign. This was, we're not there as detectives. We're not trying to do round trajectory. It was just obvious to us, and we wanted to do a welfare check immediately so we could render aid if need be.
And you found no need for aid in that apartment you checked on?
Correct.
And when you saw Officer Hankison, you said he pointed to his chest?
Yes, he pointed at himself, and then he pointed at the windows as if he's taking credit. Like, that's what I did.
He's admitting that he fired through
Yes.
those windows. That's how you took
It's
that.
how I, in my opinion, how I took it, but there was no words exchanged from us.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else to this witness?
No follow-up, Your Honor.
You can step down, thank you.
Thank you.
Your next witness?
Sergeant Brandon Hogan.
If you'll take a seat, please. And if you'll raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
You may take your mask off while you're testifying if you wish. You're not required to.
State your name, please,
It is Sergeant Brandon Hogan,
and where are you employed?
Louisville Metro Police Department.
How long have you been with the department?
13 years.
And what is, in what division are you?
Right now, I'm currently assigned to the Firearms Training Unit.
Prior to your assignment there, where were you assigned?
Louisville Metro Police Department SWAT team on the full-time team.
Full-time SWAT team?
Yes, ma'am.
How long were you with SWAT?
A total of 9.5 years. I was 5 years, or 5.5, around 5.5 full-time, and then before that, we were part-time. And I was about 4 years part-time before that.
And what does the SWAT team, what are they responsible for? What is their basic function?
Well, they have many functions, but their main function is serving high-risk warrants, barricaded subjects, hostage rescue, active shooters, stuff like that.
Does it require special training to be in the SWAT unit?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
And you went through that training?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, on March 12, 2020, you were a member of the SWAT team,
Yes.
full-time.
Yes.
And were you involved in the serving of the search warrants that evening at the Elliott Avenue locations?
Yes, I was.
And at some point during the service, were you actually assigned to a specific address on Elliott, or what was your?
No, I was not assigned to a specific address. My function on the Elliott Avenue warrants, we had houses to serve warrants on both sides of the street. So I was containment, which means I hold the outer perimeter until the entry guys get done clearing the houses. I ran the team that was in control of the two armored vehicles we have, the Bear and the Bearcat. So they were in the middle of the street protecting the entry team guys working on the south side of the street first, and they're going to cross the street and go to the north side and clear a vacant building there that was on a search warrant. So I was basically providing security for the entry team on the outside.
At some point that evening, did you hear that there was a problem on Springfield Drive?
Yes, I did.
And how did that come to your attention?
Through our headsets, we are there, which are attached to our radios. On body cam, you can't hear it because it is in my headset. But I was alerted by Sergeant Luke Fawn, who is also in CID, but he was on SWAT at that time as well. I believe he was on containment as well in the back of in the rear of one of Elliott Avenue's addresses. And he alerted me through my headset or on the radio that there was an officer shot at a location which turned out to be Springfield. And they had a person who was barricaded in that location that had shot an officer.
And did you, at that point, travel to Springfield in the Bearcat?
At that point, I sort of got a little bit more confirmation, but yeah, I gathered, I think it was 5 or 6 SWAT guys, and we jumped into the Bearcat, left the Bear there in the middle of the street on Elliott, so they could still provide cover, some kind of cover to the entry team working on Elliott Street. And we decided to go Code 3, lights and sirens, emergency equipment to Springfield from Elliott.
And what happened when you got to Springfield?
We rolled up to Springfield. We were first, we had 2 officers. Sergeant Joe Cassidy came in his own vehicle with, I think it was 1 or 2 other SWAT members. So we first stopped for them to catch up to us. So when they caught up to us, we were stopped by I guess it was pretty tall, maybe 8-foot chain link fence that was chained with a padlock on it. So we couldn't get the Bearcat through that. Lieutenant Massey made the decision for us to run through the gate so we can get up to the location quicker, which we did. Right before we pulled up to the front of the apartment, in the parking lot, I met with Lieutenant Sean Hoover, and he advised me that they had a shooter inside who was supposed to have a rifle of some sort, and 1 officer had been shot. Right before we rolled up on the radio, we also heard that the male suspect suspect at that time had come out of the location already. So before we even pulled out, I believe it was Mr. Walker, he came out. He stated that, and I heard this from the radio and Lieutenant Hoover as well, that there was no rifle inside, that his girlfriend was down inside, and she was the one that was shooting. And it was a 9mm handgun. There was no rifle.
But when you approached, then he had already come out of the building.
Yes,
That is Walker.
and taken into custody.
So
And
he was not there when you actually arrived on scene.
he was there.
He was in a vehicle.
When we actually arrived on scene, he was still in the apartment. When we stopped to talk to Lieutenant Hoover, he had come out, and he'd been put into a vehicle. So prior to our approach and actually stopping in front and starting to do our job, trying to clear the building, he had already been out of the apartment, yes.
So then you approached the building.
Yes.
Now, as you approached, did you notice the sliding glass doors?
Yes.
And were you able to see through those?
No, I was not.
Why is that?
There was some type of blinds and drapes blocking my view. I couldn't see in from the outside.
And did you notice that the bullet holes or shattered glass in the sliding doors?
Yes, there was shattered glass on the ground, and it looked like maybe half the door on the glass that creates the door had been sort of shattered and fallen off. And there were a couple bullet holes in the sliding glass door and the window directly to the right of that door.
And were you able to see into the window?
No.
Was there much light around?
There was parking lot lamps, and there was some, I guess, lights from vehicles, but it was pretty dark outside.
So you could not see into the rooms on the other side of the sliding doors or the window. Now, how did you all make entry into the apartment?
So, well, when we pulled up originally, Officer Kitchen, he took the high cover, which means he popped out of our turret, which is on top of the roof of the Bearcat, and he provided high cover down into the apartment, while we approached from, I guess, for all intents and purposes, the left side of the apartment. Our first initial plan was to throw what we call Ricky. It's basically a little bitty robot. We call them throwbots because you can throw them, right? You throw them and drive them like a remote control car. It's very easy. And the reason we do that is so we can, if there's somebody else in there who is a shooter, we can see what's in there and who is in there. It just makes it safer before we go in there and send a dog or a person in there. That was our initial plan. We got up to, I held the corner right by the sliding glass door with Mark Crawford, or Officer Crawford, as the other part of the entry team went behind me to the front door of the apartment. They actually did deploy the robot inside, and then they advised me, Sergeant Cassie advised me that they saw who later was Breonna Taylor down at the end of the hallway. He asked me if we wanted to take it, which means did he want me, at that point I was sort of like the entry team leader because I was in the back, he was in the front doing the work, and I was sort of just directing traffic, or directing people, guys, where to go. And I told him, I can't see what you see, so if you want to take it, take it. So we decided, basically for the safety of her, not knowing if she was a shooter or if she had shot, and if she was still alive and needed medical attention, that we probably need to get in there instead of riding a robot around. We need to get in there and search and get to her as quickly as possible.
So, is that what you did?
That is what we did. We entered, after we threw the robot in, Sergeant Cassie entered the front door, and then I came in about fourth or fifth behind some other people.
And so the whole team made entry?
Yes.
And did you clear the rooms?
We cleared the rooms.
First, let me ask you, did you determine the status?
We did that was we had to clear the residence of any threats first, or if there was anybody else that was going to shoot us, we had to clear any threats out of that residence first. And then we would get to her as quickly as we could and check her medical status.
And so, do you all have a medic with you, or?
We do. We have Louisville Metro EMS personnel who are also paramedics, and they are attached to our SWAT team. It's totally voluntary for them, but they get all the same gear and equipment that we do, and they are usually there on every warrant that we do or barricade subject in case an officer gets shot. They help us out, or they can help somebody else that's been shot.
And so did the medic determine the status of Ms. Taylor?
So we cleared the residence first, and then we called for the medic. The medic came into the location, came to her. We couldn't find a pulse, and then we had the medic come up, and he determined that she was, we say 1080, which means deceased.
So your purpose was to clear each room to make sure there wasn't any, and then to look for, because in a photograph that we have seen earlier, in the south bedroom, a 9mm gun was found under the bed.
Yes.
I believe Sergeant Cassie.
I never personally saw the pistol. I didn't see any firearms in there, but I wasn't looking for firearms either. I was looking for people, and if people were injured.
Okay. While you were in the apartment, did the defendant, Hankison, come to the front door?
Yes, ma'am.
And where were you? Were you up there by the door?
I was close to, I was in and out or close to the threshold, yes.
And were you aware at that time that he had discharged his pistol during the shooting?
No. I wasn't aware of any police officers, specifically, who had discharged their firearms.
should a person, a officer who has discharged his gun, come back into the scene?
Typically, that's not protocol, but like when we do warrants, we usually turn it over to the detectives on scene. So yeah, they will come up and talk to us and say, hey, is the scene clear, and that kind of thing. I've only been in one other police-involved shooting, and it was totally different than that. So it's not typical. No, it's not typical for that to happen. But it's not to say it doesn't ever happen.
Well, were you wearing a body-worn camera at that time?
I was wearing yes, but we attach them to our helmets.
Yes, and at the time he came into the front door, you had a conversation with him?
Yes,
So have you had a chance to review that part of the footage of your body cam where he came into the front door?
yes, ma'am.
And is it fairly and accurately depicting what you said to him, what he said to you in that exchange?
Yes.
And that would be Commonwealth's Exhibit 141. You asked to play that footage at this time.
Any objection?
No, Judge.
All right, it will be so admitted.
For home domestic. I hear you. I hear you good. You screamed like a. I was gonna say, hey man.
Hey Sarge, watch your footing. There's shell casings on there.
Scene secure. She's 1080. We're leaving a couple people in here to hold the scene. It's secure for detectives to come up. So I think it's casings right there. You're all casings. You're casing.
Is that Detective Hankison we just saw on the door?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, right there.
Is that theirs?
No, that's ours. It looks like.
Can you stop it?
Theirs in there.
Stop. And he just asked you, is that theirs? Or was that you?
I believe he was referring to the casings, the bullet casings that were on the ground, and he was asking, I guess, if those were suspect's casings or was it the police officer's casings?
And this is a crime scene at this point,
Yes, ma'am.
and you all are in charge of it, SWAT,
At this point, yes.
and he's entering into the crime scene.
Yeah, he's in the crime scene.
Okay, go ahead, please.
So is it
Yeah, right there.
Is that theirs?
No, that's ours. It looks like. Theirs is in there. But I'd back out until they get TIE in here.
Okay, stop.
So.
And so is that you just said to him, back out until public integrity gets here?
Yes, ma'am.
You instructed Hankison to back out of the crime scene?
Yes, I just asked him to leave
Okay.
until the public integrity unit gets here, because they would be the one taking over the investigation.
Because right now, it's you all, SWAT is in charge of the crime scene.
Correct. Until we're relieved by the detectives.
Okay, go ahead.
Isn't there any guns visible?
We did not see any.
Stop. What was that question he asked?
Yes, if we saw any guns that were visible.
And what did you advise?
I advised them that I didn't see any. I believe it was because I might have said, because I wasn't looking for guns or something like that. And then,
Well, let's hear what this body cam says. Go ahead. Oh, that is it. Okay, so you advised you hadn't seen any
right,
guns, but he asked, any guns visible?
correct.
Now, did he go any further after you asked him to leave, did he then leave?
He did.
Can we, since that went so fast, can we run through that one more time?
Two for home domestic. I hear you. I hear you. You screaming like a... I was gonna say, hey man,
Hey, Sarge, watch your footing. There's shell casings up there.
scene secure. She's 1080. We're leaving a couple people in here to hold the scene. It's secure for detectives to come up. So I think it's casing here. Sorry. You're all casings. They're casing.
So all this area down? Right here.
Yeah, right there.
That's theirs?
It's ours, it looks like. Theirs is in there. But I'd back out until they get PIU in here. So.
I just never heard you guys visible.
We did not see it.
At the very end, was that question he asked like a long gun?
Could you play it again? I couldn't really pick it up.
Never heard you guys visible.
We did not see it.
Like a long gun.
That seems to be like a long gun is what I heard.
Right, that's all the questions I have. We admitted Exhibit 141.
Mr. Matthews?
Thank you, Your Honor. Sergeant Hogan, when you first rolled up in the Bearcat, you and your fellow SWAT officers, first of all, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what SWAT stands for? We've all heard that term, but what does it stand for?
Yeah, sorry. Special Weapons and Tactics.
And that requires special training for the members of the SWAT team, correct?
It does.
Lots of training,
Yes, it does.
okay? When you all first rolled up there on Springfield in the Bearcat, what was the situation as far as, were there other uniformed officers around?
There were numerous uniformed officers. Probably in excess of 10 to 15 marked police cars, and there were other unmarked police cars there. And by the time we got there, there had to be at least 20 plus officers there.
How would you describe the scene or the situation?
It was pretty tense, pretty chaotic at first.
And did you see any officers with shotguns or long guns?
I didn't see any shotguns, but I did see rifles or patrol rifles, which are AR-15 style rifles.
And where were they?
They were all in the parking lot behind other people's cars that were parked in parking spaces. Trained, they were focused on the open door of where, the front door of the apartment.
And do you know how they came to be there like that?
I do not.
Okay. Do you know what the LMPD policy is or procedure is for long gun use or deployment?
It has to be, I'm not 100% sure on it, but I know it has to be a major situation where immediate threat and a lot of danger that a pistol wouldn't take care of.
Would perimeter containment in barricaded suspect situations with a known weapon potential
Yes.
be one of those situations?
Yes, I've been on many barricaded subject call-outs where officers have shotguns and rifles. That's the norm.
Okay. And you indicated, I believe, that when you went in the apartment, or when you went up to the apartment, it was dark, correct?
It was.
When you entered the apartment, were there any lights on?
I did not see any.
Did you see a TV on?
There was a TV in the back. I know her TV, or I guess the master bedroom, that TV was on.
And was there any sound coming from it?
I don't remember hearing any at the initial entry, but when I did enter the room at the very end, it was on, yes, and I could hear it. It was pretty loud.
Did you see any mirrors hanging on the walls in the apartment? Do you recall?
I don't recall any mirrors.
Now, you testified that Officer Hankison, or Detective Hankison, came up to the front door as we saw in the video, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he took a step into the apartment,
Yes, sir.
and he asked if there were any guns found, and as we just heard, if he asked if there were any long guns found, correct?
Yes, sir.
You testified that it's not unusual for an officer involved in a situation to come up and look closer to the scene, correct?
On high-risk warrants, where the SWAT team would serve them, it's not uncommon for the detectives of the investigating unit to come up when we turn the scene over. to them, or, you know, they take over control of the scene. It's not uncommon for them to come up and say, hey, is the scene safe? Can we come and take it over? That's not, that's very, very common. With officer-involved shootings, like I said, I've only been in one other one, and it didn't happen there, but it's not to say it doesn't happen, but it's usually not common on a shooting scene that people want to get involved inside the scene.
Well, would you think it was common for, or would you think it was unusual if Brett Hankison thought that he saw a long gun and he was trying to come up to the apartment and confirm whether there was one there or not?
I can't speak to what, you know, what he sees or what he would think.
Okay, and when you asked Brett Hankison to leave the apartment, he complied with your request, correct?
Yes, he did.
Nothing further, thank you.
Anything else of this witness?
Sergeant, when you testified when you all arrived, Walker, as you approached up there, he was already in a car, in a vehicle.
That's what, I never saw him in a vehicle or car, but Lieutenant Hoover advised that he was already in a vehicle, yes.
So when SWAT approached, was all the patrol that had been called in, they had rifles, right?
Yes.
That's protocol.
Not every single one of them, but there were multiple rifles
Right.
out there.
So how did you all approach the building if patrol was still sitting there with the rifles pointing at the building?
So before we actually approached the building, our lieutenant told them to check up, which means basically pull your rifles up so that when we walk past them, that they have a gun to the back of our head or back to our bodies. Basically, there's a crossfire issue, and we didn't want there to be one. So he told them to check up. So at that point in time, they pulled back and got out of the way, or at least pulled their gun out of the way so where we could cross.
Right. And the detectives you were waiting to come and take over the crime scene were the public integrity unit detectives,
Yes.
right? Not CID detectives.
No.
Right. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Matthews? You can step down, thank you. Your next witness?
The Commonwealth calls Aaron Sarpe.
Do you know how to spell that last name?
Sarpee.
Thank you. All right, if you'd raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. You can take your mask off while you're testifying if you wish, and please keep your voice up so the jurors can hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir. State your name for the jury.
My name is Aaron Sapi.
And you live here in Louisville?
Yes, ma'am.
And where do you work, sir?
I'm on disabled vet, Iraqi veteran, and I'm a truck driver.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you, ma'am.
So, and you're a truck driver.
Yes, ma'am.
And in March of 2020, was that your occupation then also?
Yes, ma'am.
And you have a daughter that,
Yeah.
and
Then I thought she was 2 years old.
at that time, in March of 2020, she was 2 years old.
Yes, ma'am.
And who was her babysitter?
It's an older lady called Couple.
And does she live at 3003 Springfield Drive?
Yes, ma'am, with her son.
Her son lives there.
Yes,
Also,
ma'am.
she lives with her son,
Yes, ma'am.
and she's your daughter's babysitter.
Yes, ma'am.
And is he, are you related in any way, family related?
No, man. Friends.
Just friends, okay. And how long had you been taking her there to the babysitter as of March of 2020? From
From the time she was a baby.
the time she's a little baby?
Yeah.
So what hours did you work?
From 2 to 12.
2
2 p.m.
p.m. to 12 midnight?
Yes, ma'am.
And so about what time did you normally get to the apartment to pick up your daughter?
Sometimes I get a different time. But during that night, I don't usually recall what time I get there.
Sometime after midnight,
Yeah, probably what, like
or
12, 20.
some, okay.
Yeah.
And which apartment in the building, as you're facing the building, is the babysitter and her son? Where is their apartment?
It was on top of Breonna Taylor.
And did you know who Breonna Taylor was at that time?
No, ma'am.
You did not. Did you know who lived in that apartment?
No, ma'am.
And so your babysitter's apartment is directly above that apartment? that
Yes, ma'am.
You later found out was
Was
Breonna Taylor.
Yes, ma'am.
So you got there that night to pick up your daughter?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you got there, was there anybody outside the building? Did you, in the parking lot or anything?
No, ma'am.
And where did you park your vehicle?
I parked my vehicle right in the middle of the parking lot because I usually get out, run in there and grab out and get back in the vehicle.
Right, so you pulled up behind the cars that had
No,
pulled
parking-
into the parking
spot.
spaces?
Yes, ma'am.
So it would be like here's, like my fingers are the cars pulled into the lot
Yeah, right behind
spaces,
the car.
and you pulled in this way.
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of vehicle did you drive?
During that time, I was driving a Toyota Sequoia, white one.
A white Sequoia?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If we could, okay, we now have a picture put up on the screen,
Mm-hmm.
which is Commonwealth Exhibit 3. And there's a laser pointer up there. Could you point out where your Sequoia is in the picture?
Yeah, right there.
Okay, there. And then where's the apartment of the babysitter? If you want to point where the stairs are?
Well, I'm making a mistake.
Okay, so it's right up there.
Yeah.
Okay. And did anyone else live there with the babysitter and her son? Were there anybody else that lived there?
His daughter.
His daughter also, and how old was she?
I don't know.
Okay. So you parked there, and what did you do then?
Well, I park right there. I get out and I walk into an apartment complex to pick up my daughter. And usually I spend about 5 minutes, 10 minutes in the apartment, and I will get out and we will leave. Doing that next, I went upstairs. I pick up my daughter. Coming out, it was a loud banking noise. When I came out, there was people downstairs, yeah, and a gentleman identified himself as a police, and he told me to go back in the apartment.
And so you saw, how many people did you see down at the bottom of the steps?
I don't recognize them.
More than a couple, more than two?
Yeah.
Okay, and so one of them told you to go back in,
Yeah.
and you said they were police?
Yeah, they identified themselves as a cop.
As cops. And so did you say something back to them?
No, ma'am.
You didn't say anything?
No, ma'am.
And you, okay, how many times did they have to tell you, or did they tell you to go back in the apartment?
One time.
Just once?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so you went back in?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, let me ask you, before you came out the door, you said you had gone in, you were in there when you went in, when you climbed the steps and went in, there was no one out
No,
there?
there was nobody.
Nobody? And you said you were in there about 10 minutes getting your daughter ready to
To leave.
leave?
Yes, ma'am.
And while you were in there getting your daughter ready and so forth, did you hear any knocking, banging, noises?
I hear a banging.
You heard banging?
Yeah.
And did you hear talking,
No, ma'am.
like people saying police or
No,
cops?
ma'am. No,
This is
ma'am.
cops?
No, ma'am.
Okay. You just heard banging,
Yes, ma'am.
like knocking,
It was loud.
hard knocking, or
I was inside. It was loud. Yeah.
it was loud and you
Yeah.
were inside?
Yeah.
But you say you didn't hear anybody saying this is cops, it's the,
No, ma'am.
no.
Yeah.
Well, do you remember talking to one of the detectives back in 2020 after all this happened?
No,
Do you remember a detective calling you on the phone and asking you about this?
Yeah, that was, I think, way back.
I'm sorry, what?
I think 2 years ago.
Yes, so do you think your memory of what the details would have maybe been better back 2 years ago?
No, ma'am.
No. Okay, do you remember talking to female detective Seeley on the phone, May of 2020, about what happened?
I remember talking to somebody. I don't know.
You do remember talking on the
Yeah.
phone? Do you remember saying to the detective that you did hear them saying, when you heard the banging, this is the cops,
No,
while you were inside?
No, I know. I don't remember.
You don't remember?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Commonwealth moves to play the recording, that segment of the recording, with the question, did you hear them say police or this is the cops before you opened the door?
No objection at all, Judge.
That's fine.
You said you did remember them saying something as they were knocking on the door? What were they saying when they were knocking on the door? This is the cops? Okay.
Okay, can you play that again, because it's very brief?
You said you did remember them saying something as they were knocking on the door? What were they saying when they were knocking on the door? This is the cops? Okay.
That was your voice on that telephone?
But I don't remember telling that.
That was your voice talking to the detective?
Yes.
And you said, when she asked you, what were they saying when they were knocking? And you said told her, they were saying, this is the cops.
Yeah, I remember.
You don't remember that? Okay. But you do remember talking to the detective on the phone?
I remember talking to somebody on the phone.
Okay. Now, let me ask you also, do you remember talking to another detective here in Louisville in August of 2020?
No.
Over at an office on Whittington Parkway? Do you remember coming in there and talking to?
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
And do you remember, it was Detective Herman Hall asking you the same question? Did you hear, when you heard the banging while you were inside the apartment, did you hear any talking? Did you hear them saying anything? And do you remember telling Detective Hall you heard them say, while the knocking, this is the police. Do you remember?
Can you play that recording too?
I don't have that recording, but I don't have, if the, that record,
I'll stipulate that he said it. Yeah.
that recording unfortunately is not very audible. I do have Detective Hall is present and would be able to say that you told him while you heard the knocking and banging, they were saying, this is the police.
I think it will be, if you get this recording, so I think it will be another recording for you to identify that I said that, you know.
Okay, well, it,
Judge, for the record, I will stipulate that he made those statements on that recording that Ms. Whaley is referring to.
All right, we'll just take that stipulation that both attorneys have listened to that recording and that you did make that statement to Detective Hall that the police said that they were the police as they were knocking. So I'll have the jury accept that as testimony here in the case.
thank you. Now, once you went back in, after you said they only asked you one time to go back in, and you went back in, then what happened after you went back in?
When I went back in the 5 seconds, I heard machine gun going off.
Okay, you heard gunfire? And how long did that last?
5 seconds, 6.
5, 6 seconds? And that's it, that was the end?
Yep.
Then what did you do?
I stayed in the apartment complex.
So after the gunfire, you did not open the door back up, or?
I don't remember.
How long did you stay in there?
I was there probably till 3, 4 in the morning before I left.
And so did you learn what had happened? Did you, at some point,
Later on down the road,
now, when did you ultimately leave your apartment and go?
what I live, what my
When did
apartment-
you, leave the apartment of the babysitter? Do you remember when you actually ended up leaving?
No, I don't remember.
Was it the next day during?
It was the same day in the morning.
Right, that same morning. Was it like up in the late morning or afternoon?
No, late morning.
Late morning. And you took your daughter with you? What happened to the Sequoia?
I left it there
And why is it you left it there?
because I was about to leave, and one of the officers said it had to be on an investigation, so I left it there.
The officer asked you to leave it there
Yeah.
because it was part of the investigation?
Yeah.
And so what kind of transportation did you,
My sister, she came to pick me up.
she came and picked you up?
Yeah.
Now, did you know that a bullet came through the babysitter's apartment?
Yeah,
How did you find that out?
From the son's Stanley.
That's your babysitter's son?
Yeah, babysitter son.
Where did it go? Where'd that bullet go?
He said it came through the closet.
The closet, and then what?
It went somewhere else.
Went
I
up
don't know.
through
Yeah.
the roof?
I don't know.
Okay. What did he say about it?
I don't know.
Okay. It came through the floor of the closet, I assume?
Ma'am, I never went in detail with him where the bullet came from, but he just told me the bullet went through the closet. That's what the
Okay.
FBI told him. But I never asked him where the bullet went.
Okay. And when did you find that out? Was it that morning or later?
Like 2 days later when he was moving from out of the apartment.
I see. 2 days later is when you found out.
Yeah.
All right. So, once you went back in, after they told you, you were out actually on the landing when you were getting ready to leave and
Yes,
saw them police.
Yeah.
And they told you to go back in, and once you did that, it wasn't very long
Yeah.
till you heard the gunfire.
Yes, ma'am.
And you said the gunfire, you think, was maybe 5, 6 seconds.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. No further questions. And moved, didn't that exhibit 141?
Objection.
I'm sorry, what did,
I'm sorry, that was the previous, this would be 142 of the phone clip.
the phone clip, all right. All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is the pronunciation of your last name Sarpe? Sir, you said you're a veteran, correct?
Yeah, I'm an Iraqi veteran.
Did you serve in Iraq? Did I understand?
Yes.
When you were in Iraq, were you in combat?
Yes.
Okay, you testified here before that when you heard the gunshots go off, it sounded like a machine gun, correct?
Yeah.
And it only lasted 5 or 6 seconds?
Yeah.
And did you hear any voices or any talking while that was happening?
No.
Did you look out of the apartment after it happened?
No.
Didn't come out, I think you said, till 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, correct?
Yeah. I think 3, yeah.
And when you left, you did not leave in your Sequoia, correct?
No.
When did you come back and get your Sequoia?
It was the next day. The following day.
Following day?
Yeah.
When you came back to get your car, did you find anything, any shell casings?
Yeah, I found one.
Do you know what kind it was?
It was it's almost like the M16 round,
Like an M16 round? That's a
Yeah.
rifle round?
rifle round. Yeah.
What did you do with that casing?
I give it to one of the I turn it into the AG office
You remember when you did that?
when I went for the interview.
When you went for the interview?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, I have nothing further.
Any redirect? All right, you can step down, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, your next witness.
Sergeant Mike Burns.
If you take a seat, please. And if you raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
State your name, please,
Michael Burns,
and where are you employed,
LMPD,
and what position?
full-time SWAT team.
How long have you been with the department,
Going on 12 years, I believe.
and how long in SWAT?
Just over 6.
In that, were you in that capacity on March 12th, 2020?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you involved in the serving of search warrants on March 12th at the Elliott Avenue addresses?
Yes, ma'am.
Were there 2 SWAT teams on Elliott that night?
I wouldn't necessarily consider it 2 SWAT teams, but most of the entire team was there, yes. We have a team 1 and team 2, and I think most of the entire team was on Elliott, yes.
Okay, you have a team 1 and a team 2.
Correct.
Is that 2 teams?
It's 2 teams inside of 1 team. Basically to help our on-call schedule. So you're on call half the month versus,
Okay, so how many SWAT total are there?
I believe there's 30-something total officers on the SWAT team.
And how many were involved on Elliott that night?
Probably 25 or 28-ish.
Very
somewhere in
large
there.
number, almost the entire SWAT.
Correct.
At some point that evening on the 12th, did you hear there was a problem on Springfield Drive?
Yes, ma'am.
And at that point, what did you do?
I heard some communication come over our radio, which sounded like that someone had been shot on an address and that they needed a medic and possibly SWAT's armor to the location.
And so did you go to Springfield?
I did, yes, ma'am.
And how many SWAT officers went to Springfield, if you know?
I believe there's 6 or 7 of us, plus our medic.
And you all went in the one vehicle,
We went in one of our armored vehicles, which we call the Bearcat.
Bearcat? Once you got on scene, what did you do?
Once we pulled up in the Bearcat, all the officers and detectives that were in the parking lot were pulling security with their weapons on the apartment. We pull up, we exit the Bearcat, we try to get as much intel as we're driving there, and once on scene, we just come up with a quick plan from the SWAT side, and which was I had a robot, which is it's a throw bot. You can throw it into houses and clear space without having to put yourself in there. So that the plan was which I had, the robot, the plan was to go up to the door, throw it in, and then try to clear it as best as possible because we were still under the impression that there was possibly a shooter inside the apartment.
Now, you said when you arrived, patrol was still out around the front of the building, patrol officers
Yes, ma'am.
with their rifles pointed at the building?
I believe some had rifles, some had their pistols.
So how was that taken care of?
Our lieutenant got on I don't believe it was the radio. I think just out loud told everyone to check down, which basically means stop pointing your weapons at the apartment as we, as in SWAT, are about to approach it.
Because that, with them still holding their guns at the building, that would put SWAT in danger, walking in front of those guns to enter the apartment building,
That is correct.
which would be the safe thing to do then, right?
Correct.
Now, as you approached the building, did you see the sliding glass doors?
Yes, ma'am. That was the sliding glass doors, which is right next to the sidewalk to the breezeway, is basically the first thing you see of the apartment from the direction that we came from.
And did you notice, could you see through those sliding glass doors into the apartment?
From what I recall, there was blinds or drapes or something along those lines covering the sliding glass door. I don't know if they were open or closed, but you could definitely see that there was blinds or, like I said, drapes covering that up.
And did you notice the shattered glass in the door as you approached?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you, what did you do then? Who was the lead into the apartment?
Probably Sergeant Joe Cassie maybe kind of took the lead on that. Myself and Sergeant Hogan were there as well, but Sergeant Cassie seemed to take the lead on the entry to the apartment. I was, like I said, I had the robot, and then Sergeant Hogan was in the group of SWAT officers as well.
And did you you threw the robot in initially,
I did, yes, ma'am.
and then what happened?
Once I deployed our robot into the open door of the apartment, I ran back to the Bearcat to give the controller to Officer Walker, who was driving the Bearcat. The Bearcat was basically out of play unless for hard cover, so I gave him a job to do. By the time I made it back up to the breezeway, Sergeant Cassie, I think they had already reached the threshold of the apartment door, and he had noticed that there was someone down in the hallway. That's when he made the call and decision to go ahead and take it, meaning make entry into the apartment, clear it, and then reach up to the person that's down in the hallway.
So instead of using the robot, because you could have used the robot to go room to room remotely and clear, but because Sergeant Cassie saw someone down at the end of the hallway, decision was made to personally enter.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so did you go in then?
I did. I believe I might have been one of the last ones into the apartment.
And did you have a particular room that you were responsible to clear, or is it just?
The room that I ended up doing clearing with Sergeant Hogan, I believe, was the back bedroom, possibly her bedroom, and then the bathroom that was attached to the bedroom.
And when you say clear, what exactly are you doing?
We were looking for humans or threats that could possibly still be inside the apartment.
And did you find any threats?
No, ma'am.
And Sergeant Cassie found a gun.
I believe there was one, yes.
But did you?
I never saw him with my eyes. And that was probably in a different room that he had entered and cleared, but the room.
You were in the back bedroom.
Correct, yes. The last bedroom in the hallway on the right.
And were there any guns in there?
Not that I saw, but like I said, there was nothing in plain view, but we don't search houses when we clear them. We just search for where a human being could possibly be hiding at.
A human being with some sort of weapon of threat.
Just a human in general, as far as when the SWAT team does execute search warrants.
Okay. And no person was located other than, as you later knew, Breonna Taylor at the end of the hallway.
That's correct.
Later found.
Correct.
Now, at some point, did you, during this time, were wearing on your helmet a camera?
Yes, ma'am.
And that records everything you were doing?
Yes, ma'am.
Or a video, audio also recorded. Did you encounter the defendant at the front door while you were in the apartment?
Yes, ma'am, as I was about to exit the apartment.
And did you know who he was at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
And how is that you knew?
Just through some search warrants that SWAT has done for narcotics in the past.
Did you know that he had been involved in the shooting that had just occurred?
I don't think I did at that point, no, ma'am.
And during the time that, so you were there in the front door, what did he do?
He had walked up from the breezeway kind of towards the apartment door and then just asked a question if there was anyone possibly dead down in something along the lines of, is there someone dead inside or down inside?
And what did you say, or what did you do?
If I remember right, I think I had told him yes, because I think at that point our medic had already said that she had passed.
And have you had a chance to review the body camera footage of that exchange with him?
I have multiple times in the past, yes.
And it's an accurate depiction of the exchange that occurred there with the defendant?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, at this time, we would ask to admit that footage,
No objection.
which would be Exhibit 143.
143?
143.
All right, it'll be so admitted.
Also slogan, Casey's in there.
Cell phone here.
Huh?
Cell phone here. I'm off the slow line.
Casey's here.
What is it? What's this address? Is anybody here dead? Yes.
Okay.
Wow.
You want to stop? Now, if, can you see, you can see on the screen,
Yes, ma'am, I see.
and
this.
is that person that just walked up, the defendant, who, you can see his, let's go back and start it again, if you would.
Yes. Wow, we're waiting. Texas, call me. What's the address here?
Hey, 3003 Springfield, apartment 3.
3000? 3003 Springfield, apartment 4. Hey, there's.
Play it from the beginning.
Yes.
Cell phone here.
Huh?
Cell phone here. I'm off the slow line.
Casey's here.
What is it?
Okay, stop.
Okay.
Now,
Yes.
is that the defendant approaching?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, the glare was bad on the big screen.
Okay, go ahead.
What's this address? Is anybody here dead? Yes. Wow, we're waiting. Texas, call me.
So was that him that asked, is anybody here dead?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead.
What's the address here?
Hey, 3003 Springfield, apartment 3.
3000? 3003 Springfield, apartment 4. Hey, there's.
And did you respond? Because I couldn't hear. When he asked, is anybody in here dead?
I had said yes.
You said yes, and you heard that.
Correct.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Any questions?
Just a couple. Sergeant Burns, this is just my own curiosity, but I'm curious about this throwbot. What is that exactly?
It's just a remote control robot with a camera on it that we deploy a lot of times in houses to clear them as best as we can. Obviously, it's a lot safer for us.
Is it like a ball?
No, it's got two wheels on it and a lever on it that keeps it on its upright, and you just drive it around like a remote control car.
Okay, you don't actually physically throw it, is that?
No, I threw it, yes. You
Okay.
can throw them.
And it's equipped with a camera,
Yes, sir.
but you never used that this night, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. And then, when Fred Hankison, first of all, you actually made entry into the apartment, correct?
That is correct, sir.
And you went back into the back bedroom?
Yes.
Was the TV on in there?
I believe it was on, yes.
Was the sound turned up, do you know?
That I don't remember.
The TV was on.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And Fred Hankison came up to the door and asked, is anybody dead in here, correct?
Yes, sir.
Was Sergeant Hogan there at that time?
Yes, sir. I heard his voice in the background.
And do you remember him telling Detective Hankison to leave the apartment?
I do remember him making a statement in regards to this is a crime scene, like no one is to enter or something along those lines.
Did Detective Hankison then leave? To the
I would
best of
assume
your
so.
knowledge?
On the body cam, it looked like he had turned around and left, yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Anything else of this witness?
You indicated as soon as you walked up, you saw the shattered glass at the sliding door, and you could not see through into the apartment. Did you know that those were shots coming from which direction?
I had no idea if they came from inside or outside.
Once you were in the apartment, did you see the shattered glass on the carpet inside?
I believe I remember seeing some, but I did not enter the living room.
Right, because you were
just
in
as I
the
was
back
walking out.
bedroom.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further?
No.
You can step down, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've been going for close to 2 hours. Let's go ahead and take a break. It's 25 after 3. Let's break until 4:45. Remember the separation admonition, please. Thank you. Anything to report from the break, ladies and gentlemen? All right, very good. If the Commonwealth will call its next witness.
Yes, ma'am. It's going to be Lieutenant Steve Lacefield.
If you'll take a seat, please. And if you'll raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Please state your name for the record.
Stephen Lacefield.
And how are you employed? How are you employed? Where do you work?
I'm a lieutenant for the Louisville Metro Police Department.
And how long have you been with Louisville Metro Police Department?
14 or 15 years.
Okay. Do you have an assigned role within the department?
I do. I'm the Firearms Training Center commander.
Okay. And where is that located?
4201 Algonquin Parkway.
Okay. And is that where the range is?
It is.
Okay. What type of training did you receive prior to becoming an instructor with LMPD?
Multiple trainings, more than I can remember off the top of my head, but I attended to receive my certification, the Kentucky Department of Criminal Justice Training Firearms Instructor course, as well as their Law Enforcement Instructor Development course.
So extensive instruction specifically speaking to firearms?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Back in 2019, were you an instructor with the Firearms Division of LMPD?
I was.
Okay. And back at that time, how many trainings on average would you give per year?
2 qualifications per year, spring and fall. Spring is an on-duty qualification with no training. That's just with your Class A service pistol. Fall is an 8-hour training day. There's roughly half hour to 45 minutes of actual handgun training given at that, and the rest of it is qualifying, going through scenarios on a simulator that year from what I remember.
Okay. And are officers required to do those 2 courses or trainings per year?
Yes.
Every year that they're on duty with LMPD?
Yes, state law mandates once a year. If somebody is off on administrative leave, FMLA, things of that nature, light duty, and they're off longer than 6 months, they would come back and do a return to duty qualification. So they could miss a qualification, miss one of those, and still be legally covered as a peace officer in the state of Kentucky.
But it's an ongoing basis that they have to continue to qualify?
Yes.
As part of those qualifications, are you familiar with the standard operating procedures of LMPD as it pertains to your section of firearms?
I am.
And are you familiar with the use of force section as it pertains to firearms?
I am.
I believe that is section 9, is that correct?
I believe so. I cannot quote it verbatim.
Okay, but you are familiar with it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And within that, does it teach, or as an instructor, do you personally teach the levels of force that are to be used in a situation?
No, we don't.
Do you, in that capacity, teach the levels of force as it pertains to deadly force and when it may be used?
Typically not. That would be covered at the in-service training. Our training academy is broken into 3 bureaus. Basic training that handles our new hires, recruits, in-service training for sworn officers, and Firearms Training Center. My unit focuses primarily on the skill and or tactic of deploying the firearm. Use of force, policy and laws taught at the basic and in-service level. It's rare that we would go over that.
Okay. As a firearm instructor, you are familiar with it, though?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, when it comes to the use of deadly force and when that is a option, are you familiar with when that should be used?
I am.
And when is that?
If in defense of your life or another's life, if you're in fear of imminent death, serious physical injury, kidnapping, or sexual intercourse by force.
Okay. And what is an officer required to articulate at any time why they use deadly force?
Yes, throughout the interview and investigation, they are.
Is a target and a background required for deadly force to be used?
It is.
And why is that important?
For a plethora of reasons that we could go on for quite some time over, but if I am in fear for my life or in fear for someone else's life, I need something tangible to be afraid of. First and foremost, there has to be something physically that I need to stop doing whatever it is doing. Also with discharging a firearm, you're responsible for every round, or accountable for every round.
The officer is accountable for every round they fire?
Yes.
When an officer fires, are they ever taught that they should fire into the side of a building?
That they're,
Without a view of any sort?
if you don't have a view, no.
Okay. In your training and experience, does LMPD ever teach a method called suppressive fire?
No.
And for the jury, what is suppressive fire?
I can give a hypothetical example. If I am taking fire, or I'm with you guys and we're taking fire from over there and I want to move you out that door, suppressive fire would be me putting rounds in that direction towards where the incoming fire is coming from in order to keep their heads down and safely evacuate you all.
And LMPD does not instruct on that?
No, sir.
Okay. There's a term that is in some of the procedures of LMPD when it comes to the use of deadly force and other things of firearms, and that's isolation and background. What does that mean?
So as it relates to sight picture, you have sight alignment and sight picture. Sight alignment on if we're talking about a handgun, you have a front and a rear sight. The rear sight has a notch in it or a U, and the front sight is a blade, so you align those. That is sight alignment. Equal space to the left and right and on the same plane height-wise. Sight picture is placement of properly aligned sights onto a target. So using sight alignment, sight picture, placing that on a target, that is isolation.
And is that required before someone discharges a firearm?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the service weapon that LMPD typically uses, especially in the past prior to 2020, which is a .40 caliber Glock Model 22?
I am.
How many times do you estimate that you've shot a Glock Model 22?
Ballpark in excess of 50,000 rounds.
Are you familiar with how long it may take to unload or fully shoot a completely loaded magazine through that?
So 15 round magazine, fully loaded, 3 to 5 seconds.
3 to 5 seconds? And what is fully loaded on that type of duty service weapon? What is that? How many rounds does that cover?
Up to 16.
16? Okay. think, Lieutenant Lacefield, that's all the questions I have for you at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Matthews?
Thank you, Your Honor. Lieutenant, did you personally participate in any of Brett Hankison's 2019 qualifying sessions?
I did not.
Are you aware of how he did on those?
I'm not,
Okay.
other than passing.
My understanding is that the officer has to shoot a certain number of rounds, and those are scored, correct?
Yes, sir.
And they have to achieve a certain score to pass?
Yes, sir.
And I think they get up to, 3 opportunities to pass?
In the past, they have unlimited at this point, so if you fail the qualification 3 times in a row, you're offered 8 hours remedial training and another 3 attempts until you pass.
Okay. Are you aware of Brett Hankison ever having failed a qualifying round?
I'm not.
Now, you talked about having a sight picture, correct?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever been in a gunfight yourself?
No, sir.
So you wouldn't have any idea how somebody might react in that kind of situation, correct?
None at all.
When an officer is ready to discharge his weapon, he's required to have this sight picture, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that requires some time to get that, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any information that Brett Hankison was doing what's called suppression firing on March the 13th?
Do I have any indication?
Any information that he was?
No, sir.
I mean, you were asked about suppression firing. Is that like when you see Chicago PD or cowboy movies when somebody's behind a rock covering somebody else, just firing?
Yeah, that could be.
Okay. Do you have any indication that Brett Hankison was doing that on March 13th?
None at all.
And would it be a correct statement that officers are taught, once they put their finger on that trigger and decide to discharge that weapon, that they should continue to fire that weapon until the threat is stopped?
Yes, sir.
And officers are also taught, I believe, to shoot center mass, correct?
Correct.
What is center mass?
The center of the upper thoracic region on a human torso.
And are there situations where that's not possible, to your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And at your range, do officers do simulated type of situations where shoot, don't shoot kind of things?
Like scenarios?
Scenarios, yes.
From time to time, yes, sir.
And you never do any kind of live fire scenarios, correct?
With recruits, we do. Within service, in the 3+ years that I've been there, we have not.
And when I say live fire, I mean using actual bullets?
Yes, sir.
You do use actual bullets with the recruits?
Yes.
You ever lose any that way?
Well, they're not shooting at one another, sir.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. I mean,
Okay.
what are they shooting at? They're shooting at targets?
Photo real targets, and we use simunition as well.
Okay.
So simunition is force on force.
Okay.
Um,
And that can't ever duplicate what you might run into in the field where you're in an actual gun battle with somebody, is that correct?
No, sir. It helps, but there's no amount of training to prepare you for that. You can become inoculated to a certain point where you're comfortable with it. But I don't know that anybody could ever say that they've had enough training to really feel good about that.
And when you say the rule is that you have to have a target in sight before you discharge your weapon, that's pretty standard rule, is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, would you agree with me that sometimes the rule about rules is that there are exceptions to them?
In some cases, I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Well, what I'm getting at is if Brett Hankison's out at 3003 Springfield Drive, and his brother officer, John Mattingly, just gets shot and almost executed, would it be appropriate for him to return fire even if he can't actually see the target, to try to protect his brother officer?
Per our policy, no.
Per your policy, I thought you just said the deadly force policy was that you're allowed to use deadly force to protect yourself, your fellow officers, and civilians or citizens.
Yes, sir.
So Brett Hankison was not justified in discharging his weapon?
I don't know enough about the case to make the determination whether Detective Hankison was justified or not.
Okay. How about this? Would you agree with me that there are no absolutes in law enforcement, just like in anything else?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Excuse me. Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the term tunnel vision?
I am.
What does that mean to you?
Incredibly focused. So loss of peripheral. If I get tunnel vision and I'm looking at you, odds are I'm not going to see to the left or the right. I'm going to be so focused on you, I involuntarily occlude surroundings.
And have you ever been in a situation where you've gotten tunnel vision?
Yes, sir.
When was that?
I can't begin to count the number of times that that's happened.
And I believe you testified that the Glock 40 millimeter handgun that LMPD officers carry has a magazine that holds 15 rounds?
It's 40 caliber, and yes, sir,
40
15
caliber,
rounds.
15 rounds. And you testified, how long does it take to discharge a fully loaded?
Average
weapon?
shooter, 3 to 5 seconds.
And that's just put your finger on the trigger one time and leave it there, correct?
You leave it placed on the trigger, you reset the trigger each time.
Okay, you have to squeeze it each time to discharge.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Lieutenant, you've kind of suggested here in your testimony that if Brett Hankison didn't have a target, that he did something wrong in this situation. Is that correct?
I'm not making any suggestions either way.
You're all right, Jeff.
Yeah, let's approach. Okay, Lieutenant, you were not on the scene at 3003 Springfield Drive, right?
Correct.
And you don't profess to have any inside knowledge or any knowledge at all about what occurred out there on March the 13th, shortly after midnight?
I know what happened, but as far as the specifics, I have went to great lengths to avoid looking at case files, photos. I haven't driven by the scene.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Anything else of this witness? All right, thank you. You can step down.
Just a minute.
Your next witness?
Major Jason Grissom.
If you'll take a seat, please. And if you'll raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. You may take your mask off while you're testifying if you wish to. You're not required to.
Thank you.
State your name, please,
Jason Grissom.
and how are you employed?
I'm employed by Louisville Metro Police.
And how long have you been with the department?
Nearly 22 years.
What is your position?
I am the commander of the LMPD Training Division.
And how long have you been in that position?
It was late June, so I don't know, 7-8 months. Not too long.
So you are familiar with the requirements for training of all Louisville Metro Police officers,
Sure. Yes.
and including the training required by the Kentucky Law Enforcement Council,
Yes.
the Department of Criminal Justice Training, and the Louisville Metro Police Department itself.
Exactly. Yep.
And were you asked to look at the, and obtain the training transcripts of the defendant, former Detective Brett Hankison?
Yes.
Are you familiar with his, the length of time he was with the department?
It was approximately 20 years. I can tell you exactly, but.
I'm going to hand you what's marked Commonwealth's Exhibit 144.
Got it. Thank you.
And is that the training transcript of the defendant from the Louisville Metro Police Department?
Yes, this is the transcript that we have in our records. Correct.
And now I'm going to hand you Commonwealth Exhibit 145. Is that training transcript from the Kentucky Law Enforcement Council?
Yes, it's from Department of, well, it actually says from the Department of Criminal Justice Training.
Yes.
But yes, but
And what-
associate, yes.
Explain what is the Department of Criminal Justice Training?
So effectively, the Department of Criminal Justice Training is the Central State Police Training Academy. The state operates or allows LMPD to have their own academy. Lexington has their own academy. Bowling Green and the Kentucky State Police have their own academy. And the one that the state operates is called the Department of Criminal Justice Training. The body that kind of governs the curriculum and the training for all the academies is the Kentucky Law Enforcement Council. It's a separate entity. We refer to that as KLEC.
So the Department of Criminal Justice Training actually does training,
Yes.
and whereas the Kentucky Law Enforcement Council is responsible for approving training?
Right, approving training, they're the administrative body that would approve the training and approve instructors. They have a couple other duties as well, but for training purposes, that's what.
And so the Kentucky Law Enforcement Council would have to approve trainings conducted by Louisville Metro.
Yes,
And in fact, even approve the actual curriculum for a training.
Exactly. That's the first step. Get the curriculum approved, and that's what the state says we can teach. Exactly.
Now, is there a minimum number of hours each year that a law enforcement officer has to have continued training?
Yes, 40 hours
40 hours per year?
per year, per annual year.
Now, is this in addition to the firearms qualification?
State requires us to qualify with firearms, not train, but qualify. So the qualify is different from the actual training, yes. So that 40 hours would be in addition to qualifying with the duty weapon.
And how many times a year is an officer required to qualify with the duty weapon?
2 times a year.
2 times a year. And one of those times includes training in addition to just the qualification?
It can't, that is LMPD's, that is kind of, I'm not gonna say it's been our policy, that's our practice.
Okay.
At one time would be what we call an on-duty qualification, where we would show up at the range at a pre-designated time, you would qualify and then go back to your normal duty. In practice, we'd also like to do another one during the year where the officers come in and they will conduct some type of informal training and then qualify as well. That training, though, it is important to point out, is not always KLEC certified. So it's just training that we as a department put on in addition to the required 40 hours.
Okay. If you would look at the transcript for the Louisville Metro Police Department, I think that is Exhibit 144.
Ms. Van 144?
Yes. Now, when did the defendant attend the Basic Recruit Academy?
Says he began December the 6th, 1999, graduated, or the end date of March the 14th, 2000 for 640 hours.
640 hours. So how many months is that, or weeks?
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know. Give me a calculator.
It's several weeks,
Several
months,
weeks, yes.
3 months then? Well, from December 99 to March, it looks like it's over 3 months.
About 3.5 months. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the process of actually the comprehensive training of a law enforcement, of an individual to be a law enforcement officer.
I'm not understanding your question. Could you explain again, please?
This is the basic course that a person who is not a law enforcement officer has to go through in order to become one.
Correct.
Is that correct?
At that time, and I believe it was the Jefferson County Police Department is what that is reflecting. So that would have been the Jefferson County Police Department's Basic Recruit Academy or DOCJT's. I don't know which one he went through.
Well, the defendant actually, before he came to Louisville, worked at Lexington Metro.
Okay. That would explain the hour difference. Each academy can have their own basic curriculum, so the hours may vary.
And any of the academies has to be approved by Kentucky Law Enforcement Council.
Absolutely.
Right. So 3 months of basic training, and that would, of course, include firearms use of firearms,
I would assume at the time it is the same as it is now. That would be correct.
and the safe use of firearms would be obviously included in that. Now, looking at that transcript of Louisville Metro, we see fall firearms qualification, spring firearms. This is going back to 2004. We see there, just looking down, another training in 2004 on taser. In 2005, again, fall firearms training. A training in 2005 on street level investigation. How many hours was that training in 2005 on street level investigation?
2005 was a 40-hour class, so 1 week.
Okay. In 2006, a training on resistance control tactics. And how many hours was that?
That shows 8 hours. 1 day.
Moving on to 2007, a training on street level investigations. How many hours was that?
That
2000
one,
November
the one in
2000.
November of 2007 was 40 hours, 1 week.
Moving into 2000, well, of course, 2007 also included firearms qualification. In 2008, RMS training. Do you know what that is?
In 2008.
November of 2008.
I'm guessing, I don't know for certain, but it sounds like record management system.
Okay. And then 2009, flex platoon training.
That's that when March of 2009, flex platoon, 40 hours.
And what's flex platoon training?
I've never seen this curriculum. The flex platoon was it was usually like a narcotics squad in the division levels that would do some type of street level investigations.
Okay.
I don't know, I never saw that class.
Okay. And you were subpoenaed to bring these records, were you not? You were subpoenaed to be here today to testify about the training that the defendant has undergone.
Yes.
Now, into 2000, still in 2009, a DUI update, no, that's 2010. A DUI update in 2010, how many hours was that? DUI update, February 2010.
There it is, February 22nd, 16 hours, 2 days.
Also in 2010, another flex platoon training, and that's 32 hours.
That was a 32-hour block, yes.
And so the rest of the page goes down through 2010, 2011, 2012, trainings, a number of trainings that this defendant participated in. And obviously, to be on the transcript means he passed the training. He got credit for those hours.
Yes, that'd be correct.
One of the trainings listed in 2012 of June for 40 hours, resistance control for patrol. You see that one?
Yes, 40-hour class?
Yes.
Ma'am.
Do you have any idea what that would be? Resistance control.
You don't happen to have the curriculum available?
I mean, I'm just asking you of your knowledge in the training division, what would resistance control include? Training.
My guess would be that resistance
Judge, I'll
control.
object to him guessing. If he knows, he knows. If he doesn't know, he doesn't know.
Sustained.
Okay. The next training listed in 2012 for 8 hours. Law enforcement officers killed and assaulted.
Yes, 8-hour class in August.
Okay. Every year after 2012, of course, we see 2 listings for firearms qualifications, one in the spring and one in the fall. And in 2015, there's April of 2015, a 16-hour course in officer survival. You see that one?
Yes, 16-hour, April the
Okay.
4th, or, I'm sorry, April the 8th, yes.
Okay. Now, moving into more recent years, beginning in September of 2018, K-9 weekly narcotics training.
Yes,
And those appear to be weekly for
Yes.
a number of months, going on up through 2020. And in fact, up through March 11th, 2020, and that's the last training listed on this transcript, March 11th, 2020, 8 hours K-9 narcotics detection training.
yes.
Okay. Of course, I didn't read all the trainings listed on this transcript. Also obtained from KLEC, which I handed you as Exhibit 146, from Kentucky Law Enforcement Council, are some of the curriculum, some of these trainings, the actual curriculum that was used in what, Exhibit 146. Do you have that?
You mean 145?
Oh, I'm sorry. Handing you
Thank you.
Exhibit 146.
Yes, ma'am.
If you want to look
Yes.
at that. I believe on the front page of that packet is a list that includes the curriculum of specific trainings.
Yes.
Can you
See that.
read which specific trainings are included in that packet?
Be happy to. Okay, this has the first bullet point, Brett Hankinson training history. Next is 1361-09M Police Training Officers Program. Next, 1694-11AR Law Enforcement Officers Killed and Assaulted. Next bullet point, 190413M Active Shooter Response. Next is 1995-14M Officer Survival. 2127-16M 2017 In-Service Training, Community Interaction and Recognition Training. And the final one is 2281-19M 2019 Favorable Outcome Response Training, FORT, in service.
40 hours.
40,
And now, if you would look at if you would turn to the curriculum development form for the active shooter response training,
for active shooter, sure will.
which was 32 hours.
Guess it's back here a little bit. And here it is, found it here, yes.
And so that actually sets out the curriculum that was used in the active shooter response training of 32 hours.
Yes.
So on page 5 of that curriculum, well, let's start with page 3, which would be the schedule of the
Page 3.
curriculum.
Yes, ma'am?
And so the schedule includes live scenarios. You see that? There are live scenarios for the active shooter response training on day one.
On day one, let's see,
Team
team configuration, traits, fitness, equipment.
Okay, just go ahead and read down through what would be in that day one.
ASAP overview and history. Next would be team configuration, traits, fitness, and equipment. Exterior movement, lunch, exterior movement.
Above that, it says Warrior 101. Do you not see that?
No, ma'am,
Okay.
I'm on something.
Go ahead and finish then. Do you see live scenarios?
No, ma'am, I don't.
Okay.
Are we looking at the same thing? I've got active shooter response.
Yes. Go on then to page 5.
The one that says objectives at the top. We're looking at
Yes.
the same one? Yes, ma'am.
So, included in objectives, do you see, well, why don't you just read what the objectives?
Sure. Do you want me to go through each individual line or just the titles of each
Well,
section?
what would be the goal of the overview, section 2?
So, ASAP overview history is the name of this block. 1.1, given a course schedule, the student will be able to describe the content of the course. And 1.2, given the case studies, the student will be able to list historical characteristics of active shooter response scenarios.
Okay. So, moving over to page 7. Do you see a section on there called live scenarios?
No, ma'am, on my page 7, it says scene stabilization in multiple rooms.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead and for scene stabilization.
Sure.
Okay, scene stabilization, 3-hour block. Without reference, define improvised explosive devices as discussed in class. Without the reference, list 4 dangers associated with IEDs at a tactical scene as discussed in class. Given a tactical scenario, list the steps in evaluating an IED in a tactical scene as discussed in class. Next, without reference, list and demonstrate 2 methods of marking IEDs as discussed in class. Without reference, list 3 considerations and demonstrate an evacuation of persons away from an IED as discussed in class. Without reference, prioritize scene stabilization considerations as defined in class. And the last objective, given a mock scenario, determine the location of a suitable casualty collection point as defined in class.
I'm going to hand you now, that's Mark Commonwealth's Exhibit 147. Now, is that also a curriculum for another active shooter response?
Yes, it is.
And so if you would turn to page 5 on that one. And what does it say?
My page 5, objectives, it's got an orientation, ASAP, overview history, team configuration, traits, fitness equipment, and Warrior 101. The main
And now
blocks.
go to page 7. And what, does that contain sections detailing live scenarios?
Yes, number 7, live scenarios, foot approach.
Okay, and go ahead and read some of the live scenarios.
Yes, ma'am. During this session, the student will operate in a team environment with simunition training equipment. Approach.
What? I'm sorry. Operate with what?
Operate in a team environment with simunition training equipment.
What's simunition training equipment?
So simunition is it is a brand that makes it's a life-size, almost completely functional handgun, except in shooting, instead of shooting live rounds, it shoots what's effectively a paintball projectile instead of a metal or lead projectile. That way, it is it's painful if it hits you, but it is not dangerous. It will explode like a paintball, leave a little mark, but we can use it much safer in a training environment than we could ever use a live handgun or live ammunition.
Okay, and additional live scenarios in this training?
I'm sorry.
Additional live scenarios?
Yes, can we continue with that?
Yes.
Yes. Next block, approach a target site on foot in a team formation 4 times, different scenarios. That's in parentheses. Next block, neutralize, capture a suspect outside of a target site. Understanding, controlling the flow and pace movement of a team in a dynamic situation. Understand the benefit of role players in a scenario-based training. Understand the strengths and weaknesses of a foot approach. And finally, demonstrate safe weapon handling skills in a dynamic environment.
Okay. And that training was how many hours? That active shooter training? Active shooter response training?
The whole course is a 32-hour course, so a 4-day course.
And the defendant attended that course?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you would refer to the other transcript, which was, I believe, Exhibit 145.
Yes.
The transcript actually of the defendant from Kentucky Law Enforcement Council. And this transcript, unlike the other one, starts out with the more recent trainings. And this is a separate transcript from the one at Louisville Metro.
Correct.
That he attended.
Yes.
So on this training transcript, if you would look down at a training titled, on June 10th, 2019, titled Favorable Outcome Response Training.
Yes.
And he attended that.
Yes.
And how many hours was that training?
The favorable outcome response, 16 hours.
And do you know what that training consists of by Louisville Metro?
That 16-hour block had some stuff. It had some training on legal updates, American Disabilities Act. That's the 2 things off the top of my head that I remember.
Favorable outcome response?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a couple other blocks, and I apologize, I don't remember what they were off the top of my head.
On the second page of this transcript in April of 2018, if you want to refer to that, page 2.
Yes.
April of 2018. Fitness and individual tactics in service.
Yes.
And that was how many hours?
32 hours.
Okay. Moving on down to March of 2016, almost halfway down that transcript, is a 40-hour training called Crisis Intervention Training. You see that one?
Yes.
And so he attended and passed that one in March of 2016.
Yes, 40-hour class.
Which would be obviously training in how to respond to crisis. Crisis intervention.
Crisis intervention, but was specifically for people with mental illness.
And where do you see that?
I just know the training because I've done it.
And so people with mental illness who are
In crisis.
in a situation needing intervention.
Yes, somebody that's in crisis that needs police help, yes.
The training in October 2015, 16 hours, states LMPD stops Do you know what that training is?
Six, yes, it deals with traffic stops, low risk, medium risk, high risk vehicle stops.
So when an officer stops a vehicle,
Yes,
how to respond to both low risk, mid risk, and high risk stops.
yes,
So would high risk stops involve the potential that someone who the officer stops may have a gun
yes,
and may actually respond
yes,
with shooting a gun?
yes, exactly, yes.
The training on page 3 of this transcript, in May of 2009, tactical patrol skills for the police mountain bike cyclist. Do you know what that involved?
It's a 40-hour class that looks like the police officer mountain bike course.
Do you know what that would
Mainly riding the bike a whole lot. There is a section on there about having to draw your gun or having to arrest a person that may be combative, and how to deal with that and like what to do with your bike.
Okay.
So there is a section that's somewhat tactical.
Okay.
The rest of it, sorry, the rest, just to explain my answer fully, the class is also mainly about how to ride a bicycle in an urban setting over bumps and steps and how not to fall down and.
But also includes how to use your weapon.
Yes, that is part of it too, yes.
Okay, and this transcript goes on for 2 more pages, each page with a list of trainings attended and passed by the defendant, going back to January of 2000. Well, it actually also lists the basic recruit police basic training, September 99 to March 2000. And that's on page 4 of this transcript. And so this does indicate where the defendant attended basic training, and what does this indicate?
Lexington, Kentucky.
Lexington Metro?
Lexington Academy, yes.
The Commonwealth at this time moves to introduce exhibits 144 through 147,
No objection.
All right, they'll be so admitted.
and that's all the questions I have.
Right, cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Major, it would appear from exhibits 145, 146, and 147 that Brett Hankison's a pretty highly trained police officer. Would you agree?
I would say that based on his time of service, that this is a normal amount that a 20-year officer would have.
Okay. And are you familiar with any of the courses that you've discussed here, content?
Some I'm very familiar with, and others I'm not.
Okay. Are you familiar with any part of an active shooting course that specifically teaches you what to do when your partner has been shot by an active shooter?
As far as that curriculum is concerned, only what I see here in the curriculum. I never attended this class.
And you spent some time talking about IED course. What's that?
An improvised explosive device.
What I thought. Okay, I have nothing further. Thank you.
Anything else of this witness? Nothing further. You can step down, thank you. All right, and your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor, it's going to be former interim chief Robert Schroeder.
If you'll take a seat, please.
Yes, ma'am.
And if you'll raise your right hand.
Okay.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may take your mask off while you're testifying if you wish to, but you're not required to.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you just please state your name for the record?
I am Robert Schroeder.
And how are you employed?
Currently, I serve as a part-time commissioner for the city of Meadowvale.
Okay. And previously, how long were you previously employed with Louisville Metro Police Department?
I was employed with Louisville Metro Police for 23 years.
Okay. And what roles did you finally retire as, or did you leave the department back in your previous employment?
I ended my career as the interim chief of police.
Okay. And what year was that when you ended?
2020.
Okay. Back in March 12th and March 13th of 2020, were you in that role at that time?
I was the deputy chief of police.
Okay. And at some point, then closer to the springtime, in particular June or July, did you become the chief?
Yes, I became the interim chief in June of 2020.
Okay. And as the chief, do you review PIU case files?
Yes, you review PIU case files, public integrity case files, and professional standards case files.
Okay. And at some point in that time, as interim chief, did you review the PIU case file concerning the defendant here today, Brent Hankison?
I did.
And what did you review in that case?
I received a hard drive from the public integrity unit, and I reviewed a series of investigative notes, statements, videos, photographs, those sorts of things that were on the drive.
So you reviewed the case?
I did.
And what were your...
I should say the case as it was at that point.
Okay. And what were your findings after your review of that case?
To which I object.
Would you approach, please? All right, ladies and gentlemen, a legal issue has arisen that's going to take us a little bit of time to sort through, and we don't want you to just sit here, especially since it's already 10 till 5. So we're going to go ahead and recess for the evening so that we have time to discuss this thoroughly. And then we will return tomorrow morning at 9:30 for further testimony in the trial. As I told you, though, we also are going to be going to the scene. That will be tomorrow afternoon. You will be transported there and obviously back here. I just want to let you know that so that you wear appropriate outerwear, appropriate shoes. You've been told what the demographics of the scene are, so I think you're somewhat aware that it's an apartment complex. It's apartments that are on the first floor, so I don't think there's really going to be any steps involved, but I think you are going to be asked to be both in front of the apartment building and at the back of the apartment building, so you may be off of the sidewalk into some grassy area as well. So just so you know all of those things. So I will see you here tomorrow morning at 9:30, and please recall the separation admonition. Thank you. Have a nice night. All right, sir, because you are still on the witness stand, I'm going to ask you to come back tomorrow morning at 9:30 and ask that you not discuss your testimony with anyone since you have already, your questioning has already begun.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So, counsel, I do need to speak with you just on another moment, but you're excused. Thank you. And you all can be seated. As far as when we go tomorrow to the scene, is there anything, how are you all anticipating that this is going to go? Are we going to just be in a line and follow each other around the building and then into the building? Do you want the jurors to just sort of be on their own when they're on the outside? How do you envision this taking place?
Judge, my vision would be to have Anthony here, kind of be the director and just keep everybody huddled up, and the Commonwealth and we can be with him suggesting things we would like for him to point out to the jury.
See, I don't think we can do that. I think all we can do is take them out there and then, and that's why I think I need to tell them in the courtroom, here's where you're going once you get there. And then Anthony or someone, probably, it really should be somebody who's familiar with the scene, I think, should direct them, you know, you follow this person, we'll follow around the building, we'll follow into the building, but there can't be any pointing out of anything once we're in the building. That's why I wanted there to be plenty of evidence in front of them so that they'll know what to look for when they're there, because we're not going to be on the record, so nothing can be said about the case while we're out there.
Okay. One thing I would request is that whoever drives the bus or whatever they're going in goes up and takes the entranceway that the officers took that night. In other words, the gate is no longer there, so they could access it straight off of Springfield, but that night the officers had to go up and around to get down into the place, and I would request that they follow that same route, at least on the way in.
Okay. I don't exactly know what that route is, but,
The sheriff's department do not know that route.
I'm sorry?
The sheriff's department do not know that route, or
If you all can give him a little bit more guidance so he'll know.
We can.
He's not, I don't think he's gonna be doing the driving, but he can give it to the person who's driving.
Are you going to be along? 'Cause-
I'm gonna be at the bus call when we drive the bus.
Yeah, okay, we can provide you with a route.
I don't think it's necessary that they go that route. That doesn't really, it's not a different, I mean, it's just going up it's just a different entrance way. But you can see at the end of that, you can see the dumpster right there. I mean, it's all visible. No matter how, you can go through where the gate was. But the manager, I believe, could lead the jurors through. He knows he's in charge of the building, so he can lead them through apartment 4 and then into 3 and then around back, along with the deputy.
Does he, okay, he needs to know that he cannot point out anything, he can't say anything to the jurors. What about when we first get there, though, and they're on the outside? I thought you all both wanted them to see both the front and the back of the apartment building.
Yes.
So, I don't know who, but somebody needs to take the lead, and the rest of us are going to follow around the building.
We could have Detective Hall, I mean, he's been there multiple times.
Okay,
He knows exactly where to go.
okay.
Without a speaking role.
Right.
Well, right. Okay, so we'll just get them all off of the bus. Detective Hall will lead the way, take us to the front of the building. Let us, I guess, stand there for a moment or two to see, get our bearings. Then take us around the side to the back, and then back to the front so that we go in the front way into apartment 4 maybe first, and then go into apartment 3, and then get back onto the bus. So you all have a vehicle that you're going to go in, and you have a vehicle that you're going to go in. I think there's going to be about 5 sheriff's cars that are going to go maybe along with the bus. Anything else you all can, I don't think the jury has to be told they can't talk to one another, like on the ride there, but they just can't discuss the case. It's sort of the similar admonition I give them here in court every time, that they just can't discuss any aspect of the case, or even amongst themselves point to things inside the 2 apartments or outside of the apartment building. I don't have a problem with going the route that the officers took. The jury has heard about that, so I don't see where that's prejudicial one way or the other. I think we can go that route. I don't know how helpful it is, but,
Detective Hall knows the route.
okay. Maybe he should ride on the bus?
Indicating he's not interested in that, Judge.
Well, then he just needs to meet, if he would, just meet with the driver, so he can let him know.
Vehicle could be in front.
I don't know how the sheriff's office feels about that.
If you can write the directions down, I can give it to the bus driver.
I'm not sure the sheriff's office wants to follow someone else's vehicle.
It's not that complicated. I think there's a Springfield Drive that runs into whatever that road is there, St. Andrews or whatever. And then, that would lead to, back in the day, the gate that you couldn't get through.
But you said that gate's no longer even there, so,
But the officers had to go up and around, which is not that much farther, but it is a rather circuitous route that was described in some testimony.
right.
And there's been some indication about the ramming the gate and why that had to be rammed, and I think it'd be good for the jury to be able to see why that was necessary.
That's fine.
We'll be able to see the gate's not there, how do you know?
Is there any remnant of the gate there? Is there any, like, I don't know what
I
this,
believe there's still some concrete, if I recall correctly, there's still some sign
Something
where
there.
the gate was, you can tell.
okay.
And again, the sheriff's department did not know nothing about these routes. If you put it down on the directions,
Can,
All right.
tomorrow morning?
So how many, so we have, obviously we have Mr. Schroeder still on the stand. How many more witnesses are you hoping to get in the morning? And then I guess we'll just take our lunch break and then come back and then go right after lunch?
4 witnesses after Chief Schroeder.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see if we can get all of those in. Hopefully we can. But I don't want to push off our lunch break, too very late. All right. Anything else?
On behalf of the defense, Judge.
Okay. Thank you all. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Your Honor.